Welcome back, everyone. This is Austin Reville with 2FBC Tactical in our From the Vault series that we have been doing, highlighting historical firearms that come through our shop and are available to you, as well as some in our personal collection. We try to bring you the ones in the shop first, as that's a unique opportunity for people to own a piece of history. And we have been fortunate to have quite a few items come through lately that are of historical significance and serve some major roles in history. And we'll dive back into my personal collection after we get through the ones in the shop. But one of the ones we have for you today is the M38 or 1938 model Mauser for the Turkish Empire. So this one is in a bit rough shape, but you can see the Turkish symbol there, bearing the 1943 date mark. For this particular one. Now, that doesn't mean that this rifle was actually made in 1943. These rifles are made by Germany. There are some Czech ones as well. We have a Persian Mauser coming up that was it was made by CZ in the Czech Republic, or Czechia now, excuse me. But this particular one was made in Germany, and as were most of them. You got to think, after World War I, Germany produced a ton of Gewehr 98s that they issued out in 1903 and beyond to their troops, and they didn't know what to do with the surplus. And post Treaty of Versailles, they weren't allowed to maintain a standing army, so they were looking to divest themselves of all these arms that they no longer had use for. Plus, there was the crippling, and I do mean crippling, financial penalties put on Germany post World War I. Imposed by the French and the British at the Treaty of Versailles. So they were looking to pay their bills. Historically speaking, Germany actually enters a depression worse than our Great Depression here in the United States after the war. And this would give rise to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi parties in the 1930s. This anger over the way they were treated post-World War I would give rise to them. But when it came to their guns, they were among the forefront and leaders when it came to firearms in the world. And people all over the world wanted the German Mausers. Now, we see earlier examples of them doing this. For example, we have right here a Chilean Mauser from 1895. And there will be, this is in my personal collection, there's not a huge difference when you look at the two, other than the size. And that's pretty much what they would do. They took their Gewehr 88s and they would work them for whoever all over the world. And that continued post-war. So this particular one was a reworked Mauser in 1943. So the date stamp isn't necessarily talking towards the actual manufacture date of the rifle. It's the re-arsenal date, if you will. This one would have been much longer, kind of out to here in terms of the overall size. As I said, this one is a bit rough when it comes to its presentation. It has been through a lot over the nearly 100 years that it has been in existence. But they would cut these down and maintain the 8mm Mauser cartridge, which was all over the world post World War I. And you got to remember too that Turkey, then the Ottoman Empire, in 1914 to 1918, worked very closely with the Nazis. This was the famous Tripoli invasion that was attempted under the direction of Winston Churchill that failed to open up that second front to kind of tilt the war into Britain's favor. That was to peel the Ottomans off from the Western Front, and where the British were fighting the Germans. But that close connection between Germany and Turkey continued post-war, and the Turkish military would look to outfit their army with Mausers, very similar to the K98s that Germany would be employing during this time. So when you look at this, even though this is an older rifle in terms of its actual manufacture date, I have a 1944 Nazi K98 Mauser right here. Now, this would have been the most advanced rifle for the Germans at the time. This is from their DOT factory, and they basically reworked these old Mausers It's a little bit longer, but to basically fit the more modern K98K. That was what the purpose of this was. It still features everything that you would expect to see from a Mauser. Mauser actions, which this is a little sticky. Still bolt action rifle with your magazine flip here. This piece is how you take the bolt out. It still has the high-rise sights, just like you would see on a typical, 98 Mauser of whatever variation. Like I said, we have a Persian one coming up that is in immaculate shape. But these rifles did serve all the way up through the 70s and 80s, and they still pop up around the world. And when it comes to like the war in Afghanistan or even the war in Iraq post 1911, there's actually pictures of militants, terrorists, and Taliban using these because they just use whatever they can get their hands on, and there were so many of these made that they are still using these in service today. So there is like a great, rich tradition of these particular types of Mausers, and like I said, we'll go into some of the variants. But if you're a collector, when it comes to Mauser collecting, there are so many variations of the 98 Mauser out there. It is unreal. Pretty much every country in the early to mid 19th century used something like this. They even used the 98 variant themselves because they were cheap. They were all over the place, and Germany was really efficient at making them. Of course, post-World War II, that stopped with the surrender of Germany to the Allies and the Russians. Also, just the reality that firearm technology kind of had caught up to the point that made stuff like this kind of obsolete. Obviously, you had like the human rifle that we saw previously, the Gewehr 43, which unfortunately we don't have, the M1 Grand, the SVT. There's the M1 Grand right over there. We have other semi-automatic rifles that become readily available post-World War II, kind of renders obsolete stuff like this. However, those third world countries, the countries that weren't necessarily the most productive or have the highest, monies to spend on their armies, really kind of gravitated to the military surplus market. For collectors out there, you see a lot of stuff coming from Ethiopia these days because they would buy basically everything they could get their hands on. Stuff like this would end up there. Sometimes it's sanitized, sometimes it's not. This one is not. It still bears the crest of the Turks. This is not an Ottoman one. There are some Ottoman ones that show the Ottoman Empire crest, which is really cool. But I do appreciate you coming and checking this out with me today. We have more coming to you next week. Please like, comment, subscribe, and we hope to see you in the shop one of these days. Come check stuff out like this in person. And you get to feel it and even get a chance of maybe taking it home. So you have a good one. Until next time.